He followed a signal to a planet that shouldn't exist and found a vault of memory too vast for any one mind. Livenmar became the first to carry what ancient civilizations refused to let die. The glyphs spread through him, then beyond him, into others across the stars. What was once forgotten began to awaken, not as knowledge, but as living emotion in countless minds. Because the ring wasn't meant to seal memory away forever, it was waiting to begin again. Let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. The place where nothing was supposed to be. He landed in silence. Gravity held firm. The air was dense, laced with iron and the scent of rain. The ground beneath his boots was smooth and dark, like scorched glass. And the sky above him reflected nothing. No stars. No moons. Not even clouds. Captain Livenmar walked forward, one step at a time, his gloved fingers twitching with the subtle tension that something in the world, not the ship, not his suit, but the world itself was watching. He didn't know where he was. No scan had registered a mass at these coordinates. No gravitational fields. No radio sources. Nothing. And yet, he stood on it. The planet, if it could be called that, was not in any chart. It was supposed to be vacuum. A navigational blind spot. A fold of space they passed dozens of times without incident. But then the signal came. Short. Repeating. No modulation, no origin, no pattern. Just a pulse like a heartbeat, buried in deep-range static. Not coded. Not human. Not machine. They traced it here. And found a surface that didn't exist. Command module Polina, come in, Mar whispered into his mic. Silence. No crackle. No distortion. Just absence. He checked diagnostics. Comms were live. The Polina was in geosync orbit. No anomalies, no storms, no interference. And yet he was already cut off. He let the silence settle over him. Then he moved forward toward the only landmark in sight. It wasn't a building. It wasn't even constructed in the traditional sense. 3 curved structures rose from the ground, interlocking in angles that defied orientation. They shimmered, not in light, but in presence, as if their geometry tugged gently at thought. At the center, a hole. Not a doorway. Not an entrance. Just absence. It didn't lead down or in. It led away. As if something had subtracted part of reality from the landscape and never filled the gap. Mar stared at it. Every instinct screamed at him to retreat, to call for extraction, to document, report, analyze from orbit. But the signal hadn't been passive. It had called, and he had answered. He stepped forward. He touched the edge of the void. The world blinked. When he opened his eyes, gravity still held. The sky had turned white, not with brightness, but with nullity. The ground was still dark, but no longer glassy, now matte, porous, like the inner shell of something once living. There were no landmarks, no noise, no time. And yet, he wasn't alone. He didn't hear the voice. He felt it, like pressure in the spine, like memory surfacing from underwater. Who are you? Mar stood still. I'm human. Livenmar. No. Captain of Exploratory Vessel Polina, Sector Command. No. These are your wrappings. Then tell me, what am I? There was a pause. Long cold. Filled with an almost unbearable patience. Then the voice returned. You are the fracture. The point where something once whole begins to break. He shivered. Not from fear, but recognition. He had dreamed of this moment before. Not in memory. In intuition. A lifetime of unspoken expectation, finally arriving. Shapes rose from the ground around him. Not buildings. Not machines. Moments. He saw his childhood dog, long dead, standing beside him with unblinking eyes. He saw his mother at the age of 20, reading a book that had never existed. He saw stars forming in reverse, collapsing into singularities before they were born. None of it made sense. All of it was true. He tried to step back. The ground didn't move. Not because it resisted, but because it no longer believed in distance. Where am I? He asked aloud. You are in the threshold. The ring between rings. Here, memory is geography. Time is material. And nothing dies unless forgotten. He swallowed. Is this a structure? A machine? This is a grave. A door. A beginning. And it is broken. Because something got out. The ground pulsed under him. He reached for his wrist, instinctively to check his vitals, to stabilize telemetry, to call for. But his suit was gone. Not damaged. Not torn. Simply absent. He stood bare, unarmored, and yet not cold. His body obeyed him. He breathed without assistance. He was no longer a visitor. He was part of it. The sky cracked open like ice under pressure. Light spilled down, not illumination, but meaning. Like a wordless scream made visible. And then he saw them. Figures. Tall. Fluid. Luminous and not. Not ghosts. Not aliens. Witnesses. They watched him without eyes. They hovered without motion. They radiated a single thought, one he could not ignore. If you've come this far, you are either the last or the first. And from behind them, something woke. It didn't roar. It didn't move. It simply remembered. And Livenmar understood, with sudden, aching certainty. This planet wasn't a world. It was a loop. A place where civilizations came to bury what they couldn't destroy. And he had just broken the ring. It didn't move. It remembered, and that was worse. Because memory here wasn't passive. It wasn't a story in past tense. It was active. A force. A climate. A living presence that had been frozen beneath the surface of this impossible world, waiting for someone reckless enough to open it. Someone like him. Livenmar stood still, barefoot now, uniform evaporated from his body like it had been unthreaded by the air itself. Yet his skin was untouched, his lungs full. His mind too full. He tried to look at the figures again, the witnesses. But now they were gone. In their place, something vast spread across the sky. A ring of firelight, miles wide, shifting with impossible grace. It didn't illuminate the surface, it illuminated thoughts. Ideas. Fragments of languages Mar had never spoken yet somehow understood. He wasn't reading them. He was dreaming them. And the dreams were not his. In the first dream, he was a child again. Not on Earth, on a cliff of amber stone, overlooking an ocean that blinked with constellations beneath its surface. Beside him stood a creature, bipedal, translucent skin, eyes like collapsing stars, speaking to him in tones made of gravity. If you cannot bury pain, carry it. And if you cannot carry it, become it. In the second dream, he was metal, a mind of coils and frost, orbiting a black sun that pulsed with grief. Around him, thousands of satellites sang fragments of lullabies, not to be heard, but to be remembered. He awoke gasping. But he wasn't breathing air. Not exactly. The planet was inside him now. Or he was inside it. He moved again, unsure whether he was walking or simply choosing to exist somewhere else. The terrain changed beneath him with each thought. A desert of frozen hands. A staircase of fossilized feathers. A plain where the wind carried names, billions of them, whispered in no direction. And finally, a doorway. Not physical. An absence, shaped like an invitation. He stepped through it and entered a corridor of light. The corridor was wrong. Its dimensions refused symmetry. The left wall felt older than the right. The ceiling was made of dust suspended in reverse, not falling, not rising, but folding into itself. And at the far end, a figure stood. It was him, but not quite. This version of Mar had no face, just a featureless shape of skin and light, vibrating slightly as if out of phase with the present moment. It spoke. You've done this before. What is this place? Mar asked. A ring. A seal. A forgetting. What did we try to forget? The double raised a hand, not to gesture, but to halt. You ask as if you were still one thing. You are becoming plural. Mar clenched his fists. His body still felt like his own, but his mind flickered at the edges, the boundary of self-eroding. Letting through memories he never lived. A massacre in orbit over a dying moon. A pact made in silence between species with no mouths. The sound of a galaxy mourning something it had never known. What was trapped here? The double flickered, then answered. Not a monster. A memory. Too large for one mind. Too dangerous to destroy. Too sacred to let die. And suddenly Mar saw it, a vision. A great structure, long before his arrival. Thousands of vessels circling above it. Pilgrims. Witnesses. Scholars. All pouring their truths into the ring, not to hide them, but to bind them. And then, abandonment. The ring forgotten. Buried under time. Until now. The corridor dissolved around him. And Mar stood in the middle of a field, a simple place, with grass and wind and sky. The illusion of comfort. Except the wind whispered in his own voice. You have cracked the shell. Now you must choose. Carry what we were. Or forget, and close the loop again. He knelt in the grass, trembling. He saw Earth in his mind, the way it spun, blue and arrogant, unaware that someone had just torn the seal on a library no species was meant to read. He could go back. Walk away. Seal the fracture. Or he could open the vault wider, become part of it. He looked at his hands. Light now. Flickering at the edges. His voice, quiet. What happens if I stay? The sky pulsed once. Then you will never again be one. And deep beneath the surface of the planet, something began to move. Not a being. Not a machine. A thought, alive for eons, patient and vast, stretching as if waking from slumber. And in the dark, it whispered to him. You are not the first to break the ring, but you may be the last to decide what it becomes. The world around him shifted again. But now, Mar felt it from within. Not like the planet was changing, but like he was sinking with it, the way a body adapts to gravity or a language begins to sound natural after immersion. The ring wasn't transforming. He was. Every step forward felt like he was walking deeper into his own forgotten past, except the memories weren't his. Not entirely. He stood now in a corridor lined with mirrors, but none reflected his face. Each one showed a version of him that had never existed or had, in some parallel now absorbed by the archive. One mirror, Mar in a deep-sea exosuit, surrounded by creatures with wings made of data. Another, Mar kneeling in red dust, holding the hand of a dying alien child. A third, Mar at a council of stars, giving testimony in a language made of color. None of it had happened. And yet, he remembered all of them. Behind him, the door to the field had vanished. No turning back. Above him, the ring in the sky had split into two, and now rotated in opposite directions, like gears pulling something larger into motion. He reached the final mirror. At first, it showed nothing. Then a shimmer. Then, her. She had his eyes, his features, but not his body. The face in the mirror was a woman, eyes bright, skin weathered, holding a child. And in that instant, Mar knew. That was him. Not in this life, not in this gender, but in the deep history the ring had stored. His essence, his pattern, reused, rewritten, remembered. And just like that, the word identity cracked like glass in his mind. Who am I really? He asked aloud. The voice returned, no longer distant, now close. Inside, you are a pattern of choices, but the pattern has been repeated. You are not one. You are not many. You are the echo of what needed to be remembered. The floor beneath him pulsed. The mirror shattered, not violently, softly, like breath fading on glass. And he fell. He landed in darkness, not empty, not cold, but full. Around him, pulses, like hearts, thousands of them, each beat a life, each silence a death. And floating between them, symbols, not words, not data, stories. Mar reached out to one. His fingers brushed a glyph, and suddenly he was there. A desert moon, a lone figure clutching a sphere of bone and fire, running from warships in orbit. A promise made to no one, carved in the sand with blood. Let me be the last. He pulled back. Another glyph. He touched it. He became a machine, built to remember all the extinct languages of a single star system. Alone now, spinning forever, whispering lost words into a void that no longer answered. Another, a queen made of coral, sacrificing her body to seal a black hole with a song. Each glyph was a life. Each life was a memory. And the vault had saved them all, not digitally, not as files, but as experience. And now, it was offering them to him. You can carry them, the voice said. But to do so, you must lose the border between what was and what you are. Mar trembled. He saw Earth again, saw the Polina waiting in orbit, saw the return, the debrief, the decontamination, the slow collapse into denial. They would never understand. They weren't meant to. But someone had to come back. Someone had to carry the first seed of what had been preserved here. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Then let me become the vessel." The darkness accepted him. It did not consume. It rewrote. His memories remained, but now nested within others. Countless others. Not like reading a book. Like being the book. Page and spine and binding. He was no longer just Live and Mar. He was a soldier, a mother, a poem, a betrayal, a language without consonants, a world that died laughing, a scream frozen in orbit around a forgotten god. He wept, not in sadness, in recognition. And in the distance, through all those lives and pulses and fragments, he saw a light. Not the shimmer, not the ring, a door, out, and a choice. The door was not made of matter. It was a decision, shaped into geometry. Beyond it, the world he had come from. Orbit, the Polina, the clean, clinical reality of human systems. Explanations, protocols, disbelief. Behind him, the vault, the fractured ring, the ocean of living memory, begging to not be forgotten again. Mar stood between the two, and the ring pulsed once more, not as sound, but as a feeling. A slow expansion in his lungs, like grief learning to breathe again. Then the voice returned. But this time, it was his own. Not his present voice, not his speech, but his essence, the echo of 100 lived and unlived versions of himself, layered like sediment beneath the skin. You have touched the archive. You have been touched in return. You may leave, but you will not leave untouched. He stepped closer to the door. It shimmered, reacting to his proximity. He felt his body again, solid, singular. But behind his eyes, the weight of a galaxy. He whispered, "What happens if I walk through?" And from the threshold, a thought responded, "Then you will be the first in 10,000 years to carry the vault into the light." He passed through, and in that instant, the vault collapsed. Not in destruction, in completion. The glyphs dimmed. The pulses stopped. Not erased, not lost, stored. Inside him, he awoke, on the black glass plane where he had first arrived. His suit was back, the air now measurable, the sky full of stars again. And his comm crackled. "Polina to ground team. Mar, do you copy?" He pressed trembling fingers to the transmitter. "I'm here." There was a pause, then a flood of chatter. He only half listened, because in that moment, he knew something had followed him back. Not an entity, not a virus, but memory. The archive hadn't just let him go. It had chosen him. He would return to the ship. He would be debriefed, examined, doubted. But eventually, they would feel it too, because the glyphs were already blooming. Inside him, he rose into orbit. The Polina accepted his landing. Crew rushed to meet him, scans, questions, lights in his eyes. He answered what he could, lied when he had to. "Did you encounter an anomaly?" "Yes." "Was it hostile?" "No." "Was it intelligent?" That one made him pause. Then, it was remembering. They thought he meant AI, an echo, a system malfunction. They recorded the statement and moved on. But every night after, Mar dreamed. Not in metaphor, in clarity. Whole lives played across his eyelids. Not visions, memories. A child crawling through tunnels beneath a dying ocean. A council of machines debating whether to end time itself. A poet screaming into the last vacuum pocket of her homeworld. Let no one die unspoken. He tried to write them down, tried to describe them, but paper was too small. Language was too linear. He stopped reporting, stopped trying to fit the truth into reports, and instead began to build. In the silence of deep space, aboard the science decks of the Polina, Mar reconstructed the ring. Not in stone, not in metal, in thought. He taught himself languages that had never been spoken by human mouths. He filled journals with words made of pulse and breath. And slowly, the others began to feel it. They dreamed, too. They saw flashes, stars burning backward, cities speaking in harmonics. A feeling of loss not their own. And Mar realized. The archive hadn't just infected him. It had planted him. A seed. And soon, others would bloom. One night, alone in the observatory, Mar looked out across the stars. They no longer felt like distant fires. They felt like pages. Unread. Waiting. Remembering. And behind his breath, the voice whispered again. Familiar now. You have broken the ring. Now you must decide what shape the next one takes. He smiled and began to write. He began to write. Not in English. Not in code. In glyphs, symbols from the vault, burned into his mind like constellations. They flowed from him effortlessly, with the quiet urgency of rain carving a river. Not words, but vessels. Shapes that carried emotion, history, and pain across time without needing translation. At first, the crew dismissed it. Just stress. Just post-contact trauma. The normal response to something that couldn't be explained. But then it began happening to others. Engineer Kale, quiet, skeptical, famously irreligious, woke up one morning speaking in a dialect no one recognized. When tested, the syllables matched no human language. But Mar knew them. He'd been them. Dr. Lin began sketching creatures she'd never seen. Long-necked beings with fractal eyes, weeping silver across riverbeds made of crystallized blood. Navigator Ishan had dreams he couldn't describe, but he woke weeping, whispering the name of a planet no chart had ever recorded. They were remembering, even if they didn't know it yet. Command took notice. A long-range carrier arrived, loaded with psychologists, data analysts, and containment specialists. Mar welcomed them, spoke plainly, answered what he could, but the truth was already inside the ship. It couldn't be boxed or neutralized. It was moving through them, not like a contagion, but like a story waiting to be told. And stories resist silence. He was summoned for evaluation. A cold room, a bright light, a panel of observers behind one-way glass. Captain Mar, do you believe the structure you encountered was artificial? He paused. Yes. Created by a civilization? By many. Over many lifetimes. It was a ring of memory. A vault of loss. You believe the hallucinations you've described are evidence of this vault transferring content into your mind? He met their eyes. No. Not content. Identity. They exchanged glances. One leaned forward. Captain, do you believe you are still entirely yourself? He smiled. No. And I hope I never am again. They ended the interview early. That night, the dreams intensified. He stood on a bridge made of time, watching moments spiral into light. Whole civilizations passed through him. Not visually, viscerally. Mar felt their births and extinctions, their first songs and last prayers. He could not separate them from himself anymore. Nor did he want to. And somewhere, in the dark behind the stars, he felt the vault again. Listening. One by one, crew members began to remember. Not in dreams. In waking moments. Fragments. Flashes. Skills they'd never learned. Languages they'd never studied. Griefs they had never earned. Some resisted. Others embraced it. A small group began meeting in silence. Not a cult. Not a religion. Just witnesses. People who understood that they had been chosen not to understand, but to carry. They called it the listening circle. Mar didn't lead it. He simply sat with them. And together, they let memory pass through them like music, unspoken, unstoppable. The Polina returned to Earth orbit. Command forbade disembarkment. Too risky. Too unknown. But still, the glyphs spread. The scientists who examined Mar's notes began to sketch. The officers who reviewed the logs reported strange dreams. And one by one, those who came into contact with the vault's residue felt it. Not invasion, not control, but presence. Something ancient, endless, and impossibly kind. The archive didn't demand anything. It simply remembered, and those who touched it were forever changed. Mar was offered a return to Earth. Instead, he requested reassignment. Far edge of known space. Unmanned sectors. Where signals still whispered in languages no one had mapped. They granted his request. Quietly. Cautiously. And he left. His new ship was called the Nomad's Eye. No crew. No mission directives. Just Mar. And the archive inside him. He spoke to it often. Not aloud. In glyphs. Scrawled across the walls. Etched into tablets. Carved into light. And in return, it gave him stories. Every system he visited, he planted one. A stone. A word. A whisper. A new ring. Not to contain, but to connect. And slowly, the galaxy began to feel it. Not the vault. The hope that nothing had ever truly been lost. That someone, somewhere, still remembered. The nomads I drifted beyond the edge of the charted stars. There was no flight path. No assigned mission. Only Mar, alone aboard a vessel filled with silence and glyphs, both of which had grown impossibly alive. The archive had changed him. Not all at once, and not in ways the body could measure. But in every thought, every dream, every way his mind reached toward meaning, he was now plural. Sometimes he'd wake speaking in a language from a world that never knew fire. Sometimes he'd cry for an hour and not know whose sorrow he was carrying. Sometimes he would write, and the ink would shape itself into something that pulsed. He was not going mad. He was becoming something else. A vessel. A carrier. A new ring. He left offerings in the dust of forgotten planets. Glyphs carved into cave walls where no eyes had looked in 10,000 years. Crystals encoded with memory pulses buried beneath magnetic storms. Small towers that sang only when the wind passed just right, and when it did, they told stories in chords of loss and rebirth. He didn't expect anyone to find them. But that wasn't the point. The archive had taught him something far deeper than communication. Witnessing was enough. If something had been known, even for a moment, then it would never fully die. And so he wandered, and wrote, and listened. Then came the day the signal returned. Not the same one. A new one. A weak pulse, repeating, coming from a dense cluster beyond any mapped warp lanes. Familiar. Not in shape, in intention. It was calling. Like the ring had once called him. He responded, set a course, and descended into the dark again. The world was smaller this time. Cracked, as if time had tried to erase it and failed. No life on the surface. No wind. But at the center of the ruined landscape, a spire. Broken. Twisted. And singing. Not audibly. Not even electromagnetically. But in memory. Mar stepped closer. He placed his hand on the stone, and was pulled inward. Not physically. Not like last time. But suddenly he stood in a chamber of light. Dozens of figures around him. Not people. Not shapes. Echoes. They flickered. Half present. Half erased. And all of them turned toward him. One step forward, a being shaped from shadow and glass. It spoke in glyphs that shimmered in the air between them. You carry the first breach. You carry the last silence. Mar answered without lips. Only meaning. I carry what was given. And I give what I cannot carry alone. The being tilted its head. Then you were ready. And suddenly, not in steps, not in time, Mar was no longer alone. Others were arriving. Not through ships. Through memory. Through resonance. People across the galaxy had begun to hear what he heard. Not with ears. With lives. A pilot in the outer belt stopped mid-flight and wept for a mother who had never existed. A poet on a water moon began writing verses that glowed faintly in the dark. A child on a mining colony drew symbols into the dust with her finger, symbols no one taught her. The archive was spreading. Not like infection. Like awakening. And Mar understood. He had not been the carrier. Only the first ripple. Now, others would carry their own fragments. Not copies. Originals. Unique shapes of memory encoded in soul. The figure before him in the spire reached out a hand, not to give, but to take. Mar nodded, and offered the glyph that had haunted him since his return, the one that meant, let this never die again. The figure took it, folded it into its body, and vanished. The chamber collapsed into dust, and Mar was back on the surface. But now the spire pulsed with light, slow, steady, watching. He had not planted this ring. He had found one. Another. He stood in silence for hours, not waiting, listening. And in the winds that weren't winds, in the sky that had no stars, he heard something that made him kneel. Not a message. A voice. Not alien. Not divine. Just human. You're not alone anymore. The voice echoed not from the sky, nor from the vault. It came from inside him, familiar, but not his own. He dropped to one knee on the cracked soil of the forgotten world, heart thudding, not from fear, but from recognition. Someone else had heard. Someone living. Someone like him. The glyphs weren't just memories now. They were answers. He returned to the nomad's eye in silence. The ship felt changed, as though it had sensed the resonance too. The consoles flickered subtly. The lights dimmed and brightened not in error, but in rhythm, as if syncing with something just outside normal frequency. He sat in the command chair and opened his long-range telemetry array. One by one, signals began to appear. Dozens. Then hundreds. Not traditional comms. Not distress calls. Just pulses. Each unique. Each with a glyph embedded in its shape. None of these ships had ever contacted him. None had identified themselves. And yet, they were calling across systems, species, and silence. It had begun. The memory was no longer passive. The archive was moving. Not like a virus. Like conscious gravity, minds beginning to curve inward towards something older than language, older than war. Something true. He turned his attention to the central table, where he kept his map, not of stars, but of moments. Each planet he had visited, each glyph he had placed, now began to glow faintly. Some had been untouched for years. And now they were active. A water world in the Tyrum Fringe. A hollow asteroid in the center gap. A derelict colony station orbiting a brown dwarf. They were responding, which meant only one thing. Others had found them. He initiated a full sync. The glyphs, once cold, now shimmered with memory resonance. New lives were integrating. New moments were being added. The ring had been broken, and now it was reforming, but not as a sealed loop, as a web, a new structure, a new language, a galaxy of connected fragments, no longer isolated in one vault, but carried in 1,000 living minds. And Mar had become the keystone. He was not ready for the transmission. It arrived without warning, not through antenna, not through field, directly into the archive inside him, like a thought spoken from afar. A place, a glyph, a time. He saw a symbol he had never written, a spiral within a spiral, notated with a kind of glyphic syntax that hummed differently, not with memory, but with urgency. This one was a warning. He traced it, matched its frequency. It pulsed in a sharp, triple beat, not like the others. Distress, but not human, not mechanical. Cognitive distress. He had seen it only once, at the edge of the original vault, when something began to stir in the deep dark. He set a course immediately. The spiral brought him to a world with no name, just coordinates. A dust planet, half swallowed by its own crust. But buried beneath it, a structure. Not one he had built. Not one he had planted. This one was older. And it was crying. He landed with caution, descending into the planet's collapsed terrain. The glyphs began reacting the moment he stepped outside. They glowed in the air. They ached. A ring, half-formed, broken, encircled a pit of fused glass. He approached the edge. Inside, a single figure. Alive. Barely. Not human. Not known. It looked up. Its eyes were fractal, like lenses shattered and reassembled. Its skin pulsed with broken glyphs, twisted and smeared as if something had damaged the archive inside it. It looked at him and begged. Not with words. With a glyph projected from its body. Too much. Mar stepped closer. The being reached toward him, and suddenly, he understood. This one had carried too much. Had tried to integrate more than it could hold. Had been flooded by the echo of a dying empire, and was fracturing under the weight. He knelt beside it. Spoke gently, glyphs tracing from his fingertips into the air like breath. You are not alone. You do not have to carry it all. Let me share it. The figure trembled, then collapsed into his arms. Not in death. In relief. A glyph passed between them, old, soft, full of childhood and music and firelight, and settled in Mar's chest. Not as burden. As inheritance. He stayed for hours. Listened to the broken glyphs hum. And when the being, the other carrier, finally stood again, its skin no longer flickered. It bowed once. Then turned toward the stars. Without words, they parted. No names exchanged. Just a shared understanding. That the archive must never be held by one alone. That memory must be distributed. And that what was coming, what had once escaped the original vault, was still out there. And still hungry. He watched the other carrier vanish into the night sky. No dry flare. No sound. Just gone. But Mar didn't feel alone. Not anymore. Because now he understood. The archive had never been meant to stay buried. It had only needed time. A carrier. A crack in the wall wide enough to let memory leak back into the stars. He had been the fracture. But now, the galaxy was full of them. The nomad's eye hummed under his touch as he returned to orbit. Systems flickered not in error, but in rhythm, syncing, stabilizing, listening. New signals were everywhere now. They came not in speech, not in text, but in experience. He could feel them ripple through the archive within him, not downloads, but emotional bursts, wonder, grief, the loneliness of a civilization's last breath, the joy of a species that saw color for the first time. He was receiving echoes from worlds he'd never visited, lives he'd never touched. Because now there were others. Dozens. Hundreds. Carriers. All scattered across the stars. Some were scientists. Others artists, children, outlaws. But each had been chosen by the memory. Each had broken their own piece of the ring. And now, it was everywhere. Command didn't understand. When they summoned Mar again, demanded an explanation for the anomaly spike, the glyph transmissions, the unexplained cognitive transformations, he gave them only this. You buried the past in glass and forgot it could bleed. Now it's flowing again. You can't contain it. You can only carry it. They called him dangerous. They called him unstable. They revoked his clearance. And it didn't matter. Because the story had already escaped them. The archive didn't need permission. It only needed witnesses. He left the nomad's eye one final time. Parked it in orbit around a neutron star, where no one would find it by accident. He carved a glyph into the hull. Not a warning. Not a beacon. A phrase from one of the earliest vault fragments. What we remember shapes what remains. Then he entered the shuttle and set a course for nowhere in particular. Because now, his path wasn't linear. He would follow the signals, the songs, the resonance of minds who were learning that not every thought they held was entirely their own. And wherever he found memory struggling to survive, he would give it shape. He would make it seen. The final glyph came to him in silence. It formed not in language, but in balance. 8 spirals, each feeding the next, each holding back the collapse of the other. He understood. in that moment, what the ring truly was. Not a prison, not a vault, but a promise that even in a universe spinning toward entropy, something could hold, something could last, not because it was written, but because it was carried. He etched that glyph into his skin and smiled. Somewhere far away, on a backwater colony with no name, a girl drew spirals in the sand. Her mother asked her what they meant. She shrugged, smiled softly, and said, "I just remember them."